Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you're doing well. Going to go through most of the article, not quite all. There is a link in the description. Now, you're going to be probably aware of the general topic, Gabbie Petito, Brian Laundrie. You might have already read an article giving you the latest information, which is what we're going to do here, which came out just a few hours ago or so. FBI have finally revealed that Brian Laundrie has admitted to murdering Gabbie Petito in the notebook that was found near his remains. So I'm going to read through the majority of the article. I'm going to skip those parts that give the detailed backstory in regards to the murder of Gabbie Petito, but we're going to go through a fair amount. We're also going to touch on what happened in Moab. I think I've got that right. The police department, when the police officers pulled over and spoke with Gabbie Petito and Brian Laundrie for a long time. I think it's mentioned 75 minutes. There's a mention about what's happened with that situation, what's happened to the police officers involved. So we'll look at that. But I would imagine this is pretty much going to be the last article, the last wave of articles that we're going to see in regards to Gabbie Petito and Brian Laundrie. So for those true crime channels that have been milking the story for a while, sorry guys, you're going to have to move on to something else. But let's have a look at this article. Brian Laundrie took responsibility for killing Gabbie Petito in the notebook that was found near his remains more than a month after he went missing, the FBI has revealed. The notebook was found next to his body in the Carlton Reserve swamp near his parents' home in Northport, Florida on October the 20th. He died of a single gunshot wound to the head, and along with the notebook, officers also found a backpack and a revolver. It's not clear when he died. So it's probably not clear because he was covered by a swamp, so he would have degraded. There's probably a better word than that, but I'm going to say degraded pretty rapidly, I would think. He had been on the run since September the 13th after strangling Petito in Wyoming during their cross-country RV trip earlier this summer. His remains were found more than a month later after an extensive search of the swamp. In an announcement on Friday, the FBI said it was closing its investigation into Petito's death after concluding that Laundrie did admit to having killed Gabbie. The Bureau did not say what specifically he wrote in the notebook, claiming responsibility for Petito's murder, but seemingly he, despite the details not being explicitly released, seemingly the FBI are stating that at least fairly clearly Brian Laundrie, within the notebook that was found next to his remains, he has admitted to having killed Gabbie Petito. He has taken responsibility for having done so. So the article tells us that Gabbie died of blunt force injuries to the head and neck and manual strangulation, according to the coroner. She had been dead for 3 or 4 weeks before her body was discovered. So it is, obviously very tragic. Obviously, condolences to the family concerned. I guess we can be grateful that finally the case has come to an end. Again, apart from those true crime channels that would have liked to fleece the subject for a little while longer. But for the rest of us, I guess we can be happy that the family can have some sense of, putting things to rest mentally, emotionally, and being able to move on. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I think I'm right in saying that for those families that have lost someone due to murder, and when there are still question marks, it wrecks the brain, it wrecks people's emotions, etc. So going back to the article, in a statement on Friday, the FBI said law enforcement officers were present when Mr. Laundrie's parents located an item in the park later determined to belong to Mr. Laundrie. Upon further search of the area, investigators found human remains later confirmed to be Mr. Laundrie, along with a backpack, notebook, and a revolver. A review of the notebook revealed written statements by Mr. Laundrie claiming responsibility for Miss Petito's death. So that's a pretty important statement. A review of the notebook revealed written statements by Mr. Laundrie claiming responsibility for Miss Petito's death. Claiming responsibility. I mean, I guess that's a bit of a vague term. It's not as specific as saying, yes, I killed her, yes, I strangled her. Seemingly it's not that specific, but at the same time, I guess it constitutes a full confession. On Thursday, Petito's parents met with FBI officials at the Tampa field office for a private meeting, which I did hear went for more than 8 hours, where they were informed that the investigation into her death will be closed. Here's a quote. All logical investigative steps have been concluded in this case, said FBI Denver Division Special Agent in charge, Michael Schneider. The investigation did not identify any other individuals other than Brian Laundrie directly involved in the tragic death of Gabbie Petito. The FBI's primary focus throughout this investigation was to bring justice to Gabbie and her family. And, I mean, can we say that justice has been brought? Some will say no. Some will say that Brian Laundrie was able to determine his own fate, and with that, justice was not served. I don't know. I would dispute that. I would think that, look, at the end of the day, closure has been achieved. They have identified to a very high standard, I would say, certainly a satisfactory standard, how the death occurred, how their deaths occurred, and they've, by finding the notebook, seemingly with Brian's written confession, although we have not been made privy to that, seemingly they have all they need to be able to clarify to everyone concerned, but most importantly to Gabbie's parents, to Gabbie's family, that indeed Brian did murder her. So, I mean, I guess, again, I really don't know, but I guess that brings at least some level of comfort. I may be miswording that. Perhaps comfort isn't the right thing to say, but lessens the heartache, lessens the mental confusion. I don't really know what I mean. Anyway, back to the article. Chris and Roberta Laundrie, Brian's parents, have been widely condemned for not talking with Petito's family or turning their son into police when he returned from his trip, especially after she was reported missing. He left their home on September the 13th, 2 days after her family on Long Island, New York, reported her disappearance. Petito's family criticized the Laundries for not helping them. So yeah, the Laundrie's parents, Brian Laundrie's parents, have faced a lot of backlash, not least from YouTubers, certain YouTubers that have camped outside of their home, heckling them for days, perhaps weeks, and all kinds of accusations of them being involved. Seemingly, the FBI, my take on it, I mean, earlier in this article, they've stated that no other persons have been deemed responsible for this death. All investigative steps have been concluded. The investigation into her death will be closed. So it seems that the FBI don't feel that the parents were unduly protecting Brian or unduly involved. So we just have to go with that. I guess we can speculate that perhaps Brian Laundrie did inform the parents that he had murdered Gabbie, but that would be mere speculation. We're never going to know that. In any case, the FBI has dropped the subject, so to me, you know, that's that. I think we all should move on. You know, with the exception of the family, Gabbie's family. I wouldn't want to say move on in such a disregarding sense to them. But for the rest of us idle viewers, as it were, yeah, we should just move on from this topic, in my opinion. After the body cam footage emerged, the Price City Police Department launched its own independent investigation and said Wednesday that the officers should have pressed charges in the incident. Okay, so now we're talking about the police department footage, which I dare say that you're aware of. You probably saw this conversation. I watched it a couple of times. There's at least 2 videos from 2 different body cam angles showing the conversation between Brian Laundrie, Gabbie Petito, and the Moab City police officers. So that's what we're going to be talking about here. After the body cam footage emerged, the Price City Police Department launched its own independent investigation and said Wednesday that the officers should have pressed charges in the incident. Here's a quote: "I believe the officers responded to a domestic violence call and they had probable cause an act of domestic violence had been committed. This should have meant an arrest was made, either by citation or custody. Despite evidence pointing towards Petito as the aggressor, it was noted that she had probably been the victim of violence in the relationship." So I'm just going to make a couple of comments on here for whatever it's worth. As I mentioned, I did watch these body cam videos. It was a while ago. I can't remember all of the details. But my general impression, my takeaway at the time was that Gabbie Petito was at fault. She admitted as such. She was hitting Brian Laundrie's arm whilst they were driving, and they were pulled over because Brian Laundrie, as the driver of the white van, hit a curb whilst he was driving. He was driving erratically, and seemingly that was 100% the fault of Gabbie Petito. Gabbie grabbed his arm or something like that, or certainly hit his arm. So, to me, my interpretation, when they were having this conversation, the police officers with Brian Laundrie and Gabbie Petito, my takeaway, and I know a lot of people, I know ultimately I'm wrong, or ultimately my impressions were wrong. It shows that I wasn't able to read the situation fully, and a lot of people that I've seen on YouTube seemingly were able to read the situation such that Gabbie Petito was a victim. That wasn't my reading at all. My reading was that Brian was very calm. Brian was very reasonable. Brian had been hit, struck, scratched, punched by Gabbie multiple times previously, and just prior to them being pulled over. Gabbie Petito, to me, she was a mess. I mean, she was saying that she has anxiety. She was a mess. She was in bits. Highly emotional, not in the least bit calm, not in the least bit reasonable. Or maybe she was a little bit reasonable, but she was very, very erratic, and she was giving Brian a hard time. That was my read on it. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that I was utterly wrong, seeing as Brian has admitted in his notebook that the FBI have recovered but not fully released. I guess that I'm entirely wrong, seeing as Brian has admitted to having killed her, killed Gabbie, and she died of strangulation. So I would dare say that given Brian has claimed responsibility for having strangled Gabbie to death, that he likely was guilty of domestic violence against Gabbie prior to that occurrence, prior to the murder. But that was not my reading at the time. My reading at the time was that Brian seemed like a decent guy to me. Seemed like a decent guy. Now, most people on YouTube were 100% in Gabbie's defense immediately. Oh, she's a domestic violence victim. Brian probably attacks her all the time. You know, one witness said Brian was hitting her. Gabbie's just scared to break up. She doesn't know what's going to happen. All of this, I wasn't buying it, but you know, I was wrong. Anyway, back to the article. As a result of the investigation into the police department, it's recommended that 2 of the police officers be put on probation for how they handled the incident. He also concluded, and this is, who are we talking about? We're talking about some guy who was head of this investigation, Police Captain Brandon Ratcliffe, also concluded that he couldn't be certain that the officers could have changed the outcome of Petito's fate if they had acted accordingly. Here's a quote: "Would Gabbie be alive today if this case was handled differently? That is an impossible question to answer, despite it being the answer many people want to know. Nobody knows, and nobody will ever know the answer to that question." So yeah, I mean, just perhaps I've not really articulated that well, but essentially there has been an investigation into the police officers concerned that failed to arrest Gabbie Petito, because based on their investigations, and they spoke with at least one witness, they spoke both with Brian, they spoke with Gabbie Petito at length. Based on all of that information, you wouldn't be in a position to claim that Brian Laundrie was guilty of domestic violence. You wouldn't be able to do that. Certainly not in the moments preceding the conversation, not in the moments preceding the reason for the police officer to pull over the white van. So should they have arrested Gabbie Petito? I don't know, man. I mean, to me, I thought they were very professional. In my judgment, my judgment's obviously meaningless, but I was surprised by how many officers were involved in this discussion with Brian Laundrie and Gabbie Petito. It was half a dozen, perhaps more, officers involved, and it went on for 75 minutes. So that's 75 minutes worth of police officers' wages times 6. I mean, that's a fairly high amount of taxpayers' money invested into that conversation. And so I thought they were extremely thorough. I thought the supervisor, or whatever his title was, he was trying to be very helpful, very understanding to his more junior officers. I thought they handled things very professionally. Did they make the right decision? Well, I mean, things went horribly wrong, so you couldn't really argue that they made the right decision. But as the investigators, those that have investigated the police department's actions, as they've concluded, who knows what would have happened? You know, they could have, if they had arrested Gabbie Petito, and then she gets released, and you know, how is that going to stop any domestic violence occurring? Probably wouldn't, would it? I don't know what the answer is, but presumably the answer is, I'm going to say this, and some of you may really dislike what I have to say, really, really dislike it, but I'm going to say it anyway. And this is from the top of my head. I've got to say, this is what I'm going to say. You're going to hate this. You're going to unsubscribe. You're going to do all of this, right? Gabbie Petito ought to take some level of the blame for this situation, some level of the responsibility, because she remained in the relationship. If the relationship was that toxic, if the relationship did involve ongoing physical abuse whereby Gabbie was not the perpetrator but the victim, then she ought to have left that relationship. She had parents, she has family, she has friends, she has she had Instagram supporters, YouTube subscribers, whatever it is. she's not a child. She wasn't a child. She was an adult. Call me a complete arsehole if you want. Call me completely clueless. I wouldn't disagree with that part. But I would say that she had the means to leave the relationship, and she chose not to do that. She chose to stay with someone who was, I'm going to say, mentally unstable, violent, a domestic violence abuser. She chose to stay with someone like that. And that's a fault. That is a mistake. And seemingly, I've been doing this true crime channel for, coming up to 3 months. And I'm looking at crime, I'm looking at murders, I'm looking at child murders. And almost all of certainly in regards to the child murder cases that I read through, the articles that I read through, it's the mother having a relationship with the boyfriend, and the boyfriend's got a criminal history. The boyfriend is clearly violent. The boyfriend is clearly unstable. Yet these women are choosing to date them, choosing to have relationships with them, choosing to live with them. So as much as you may not like what I'm saying here for the last few minutes, perhaps you've not liked any of what I've said, but the main gist of what I'm trying to say is I think women in general really do have to take responsibility for who they choose to be their partners. And if you go about choosing arseholes for your partners, he's more than an arsehole. He's literally a murderer. He was literally a domestic abuser by the look of it. If that's who you choose to have as your partner, then I don't know. You're partly to blame. You're at least partly to blame. Certainly, if you have the means to leave a relationship, if you have a supportive family, if you have any other outlet to just get out of there, and not every woman will have that outlet, but I would imagine most do. Gabbie did. Gabbie had loving parents. She could have left. She could have called mom and dad. Hey mom, I've had enough. I got to get out of here. Can you wire me some money? I needed to take a plane. I need to get an Uber to take me to the airport. Then I need to catch a plane, and then I want to live with you for the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. This relationship is bad. It's toxic. It involves violence. I've got to get out of here. What are the parents going to do? If the parents are loving parents, which we're presuming that they are, then they're going to say, of course, Gabbie, let us wire you some money, leave today. Call that Uber right now. Bring your notebook, bring your iPad, leave everything else. Don't worry about it. Just your safety is paramount. Just come home. We'll look after you. And that's that. So, obviously, I feel sorry for Gabbie Petito's death. I'm not trying to excuse Brian Laundrie in any way. I did think, as I've mentioned, after having watched these body cam videos, I did think that Gabbie Petito was the one that was mentally erratic, as she was claiming to be, and Brian was the calm one. It did seem very much, as the police's interpretation was, that Brian was the victim of domestic assault, certainly in the moments leading up to their stoppage. But, presumably that's missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture seemingly was the case that Gabbie was a victim of domestic violence or such, domestic abuse of one kind or another. She should have got out of there. I kind of feel that it's wrong that the police officers are in trouble for this. They tried to do the right thing. They were very thorough. They were attempting to be very helpful. They tried to do the right thing. So seemingly technically, arguably, they broke their own procedures. Maybe so, maybe not so. But either way, I just feel it's a little bit unfair to use them as scapegoats, to use them as whipping boys, when they were so professional. They really were. And, you know, in my judgment, which is meaningless, I don't know anything about this, but from my judgment, they were good guys doing a very difficult job. They were handling it. They were knowledgeable about the situation. They investigated. They asked the right questions. They were given plenty of information to make their judgment. They were required to make a judgment. They could have chosen to make an arrest. They could have chosen not to make an arrest. You know, it was not entirely black and white. So they made their choice for reasons. And, you know, essentially, I believe the reasons were, hey, look, this doesn't seem to be that serious a case. Gabbie was seemingly guilty of hitting, scratching Brian, but, you know, Brian doesn't seem to be bothered by it. Brian doesn't want to press charges. Relationships aren't perfect. Arguments do happen. You know, they are living, or they were living, in a van. You would imagine that's hugely stressful. So let's just give them a pass and just let them get on with their day. And you know, as far as I remember, they did the right thing. I'm going to say they did the right thing. They did separate. They insisted on separating them for the night. Brian took the... Oh no, Gabbie took the van and Brian stayed in a motel, something along those lines. But either way, they did separate them. So, I don't know. I hope these police officers are able to move on from this. I hope their scapegoating doesn't last for too long. Anyway, there's that video. I've rambled for quite a bit. So, in essence, to quickly summarize, Brian Laundrie has admitted to murdering Gabbie Petito in the notebook that they were found. The parents did find the initial items that belonged to Brian Laundrie when they were doing the search, and they did so with the FBI and the other searchers, police searchers, whatever they're called, right by them. So there was no shenanigans going on there. The FBI, the police, have spoken with Gabbie Petito's parents at length, and they've said essentially, look, Brian Laundrie's had admitted to having murdered Gabbie. We don't feel anyone else is involved. The Brian Laundrie's parents are not subject to any further investigations. Everything's going to be coming to a close. So there we go. So look, I mean, hopefully everyone involved, the families involved, can move on from this, and condolences to everyone, I guess. But I think there's some good news in that this whole scenario is over.